Welcome to Educating to be Human, a podcast where we'll explore what it means to be human in today's world at the intersection of education, technology, and culture. I'm your host, Lisa Petrides, founder of the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management and Education. Each week, I'll speak with people who are supporting transformative change in education today. That is, ordinary people creating extraordinary impact. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for joining us on Educating to be Human. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Julius Cave, the Regional Director of the Leading Men Fellowship, a program of the Literacy Lab. The Leading Men Fellowship is dedicated to bringing young men of color into the classroom as pre-K educators, which profoundly reimagines representation in early education and transforms students' experiences in the classroom. Leading Men Fellows are young men of color, they're 18 to 24, with a high school degree or a GED equivalent, who participate in a year-long residency-style experience in which they are trained to provide literacy support to pre-K students while they receive coaching and professional development. Now, Julius and his team have created a curriculum that addresses literacy needs through evidence-based instruction, and at the same time, they're reshaping learning pathways that emphasize cultural relevance and community-rooted support for these pre-K students and for the fellows themselves. When I was in Atlanta earlier this year, I had the good fortune to see this work in action. I witnessed firsthand the profound impact these young men are having on pre-K learners. And as you'll hear from Julius, this program not only supports literacy, but gives these young men an opportunity to further their own education. Many of them continue on to college, some as educators, and almost all continue serving their communities in some way. This program is truly diversifying the teaching pipeline. It's building community resilience, and it's sowing the seeds for change in cities across the country. Welcome, Julius, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So I would love to hear a bit more about the Literacy Lab and the Leading Man Fellowship and what you do in that program.
Yeah. First, Lisa, let me say thank you to you for having me on and getting a chance to speak about our work. Also, congratulations to you on this podcast. When we met in person, we were talking about it as an idea, and here it is now.
That's right.
Part of life. So yeah, the Leading Man Fellowship is a program of the Literacy Lab. Now, as an organization, the Literacy Lab was started in 2009. The Leading Man Fellowship came about in 2016 in Washington, D.C., where we're headquartered. Now we're currently in 5 cities: Atlanta, Milwaukee, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Cincinnati. The work of the Literacy Lab has been focused since our inception around literacy for young students, how we support that in neighborhoods who have experienced economic and racial inequities. And then the Leading Men Fellowship, we came along to say, how also we think about who's in front of children and how do we increase and diversify the educator pipeline. And so our focus with the Leading Men Fellowship is a couple main things. One is early intervention around literacy and support for the development of literacy skills for students in pre-K classrooms. The other piece is leveraging the opportunity to diversify the educator pipeline with specifically young men of color, ages 18 to 24, who work as literacy tutors in those pre-K classes for a full school year. And it's also an opportunity to provide a professional working opportunity for these young men who don't have a bachelor's degree right now. So fellows commit to working for a full school year in one classroom at one school with the focus on leveraging the training that our coaches and other folks provide to deliver a curriculum that's aligned to the science of reading. We use this called the SEEDS curriculum that's really designed to see where students are and support them on that journey, that literacy journey for that full school year.
How do these prospective fellows find you? So where do you recruit these young men from? And tell me a little bit more. It's interesting. You said they come to you and they don't have a college degree at this point.
So I think we take a step back. One, Young men are not encouraged, typically encouraged to go into the education field. So our work in recruiting is really trying to go far and wide to find young men that are looking for an opportunity like this, that maybe have an interest in working with students, but maybe it hasn't been encouraged or they didn't know how to get into the education field. So we do recruit at high schools, so for young men that'll be graduating. We do recruit at colleges. So some of our fellows, our college students, like I said, they just don't have a bachelor's degree already. We go to community colleges. We connect with other community organizations. We're at events, number of places wherever we can go to share about the opportunity and talk about it not only as from the lens of being an educator, but also the opportunity for them to grow in their professional and personal development as well.
Well, and you talk about diversifying the pipeline or diversifying the workforce. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think that men of color, Black men in particular, make up what? Less than 2% of the country's teaching force? Is that about right?
That's it. That's it. Last statistic I saw was 1.3% for Black men.
1.3. And now let's talk about pre K. I'm imagining
Right.
that number's got to be substantially less.
Right. Right. Correct.
Great. So you're really recruiting for a program that is so needed and certainly is, I would say, in uncharted waters, right? I don't know of another program like this that is reaching out to young men of color to see about interesting them and helping to train and mentor them into the education sector.
I think what we found is that there are programs that are focusing either more on the literacy aspect or more focused on supporting male educators of color. I think for us combining that and again with early education is pretty unique.
I want to talk a little bit about why literacy and the impact of literacy, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and how does your origin story impact the work that you do now?
Yeah, so a couple things for me. So I grew up in Allendale, South Carolina, actually the smallest county in South Carolina. And a couple pieces that have stuck with me in terms of my journey is that one, surrounded by a family of educators, surrounded by folks who said that education was important. That was always a push in my family, and for me, feeling called and to the education field, and that's something that I was supposed to do. And so, with that encouragement from family and saying, pursue that calling. And here we are. So I've been an educator for a number of years now in a number of different capacities. But for me, supporting young students in this field is always critical and important for me. Also, growing up in Allendale, I think, what I witnessed is, perception of a community. If we were just look at some of the data and statistics about the community, a lot of folks would see those as negative and completely miss the amazing and incredible people that make up the community, the genius and the amazing young students that are part of the community. And so for me, this work is about that calling, but it's also how do we work in specific communities and areas and support and help the incredible people and incredible students and folks that make up these communities. And so that's for me the through line in my career. So working in Houston, Texas, Memphis, Tennessee, and now Atlanta, Georgia, it's always about how do we put more of a positive light and see the opportunity that we have versus some of the negative information that is promoted a lot of times.
So we get to literacy, right? And literacy is the core. It's the first piece. And so you are impacting when we're talking about the pre-K level. This is the beginning. This is the beginning of learning. This is the beginning of critical thinking, right? What is it that you're doing at that level? And what is it about your program that is really impacting these young people in this way?
So one, it's thinking about the literacy piece and some aspects of everything we do is one, infusing joy and making it fun, right? It's learning, but how do we do this in a fun way? Thinking about part of the curriculum we use to focus is on development by doing. So, encouraging students to practice and actually leverage and use the skills that our fellows are going over. It's encouragement. So continue to encourage them to work towards their educational goals. And it's done in a caring and compassionate way. I think that's important, especially we think about human beings. Sometimes we talk about education in terms of data and outcomes, right? But to your
Right.
question about how do we get there, it's remembering that we're working with human beings, and so care and compassion. Some of our fellows' interventions are done in small groups and one on one. So it's an opportunity to build relationships. That's also why fellows are in that one classroom for a full school year. So we know it because we know it takes time to build relationships. And so when we hear things like, students that at the beginning of the year were, not really speaking at all, but through their work with their fellow, where they got some more one-on-one time and small group time, that helped that student open up and communicate more, which is a part of literacy, right? When we hear about students that the first couple weeks are crying pretty much every day in their classroom. And so when a fellow is able to spend time with them, that helps. That helps in their building relationships. We hear later on that student is more active in class and they're not crying anymore. And teachers and others can attribute that directly to that fellow's work, and that's what helps get to that data and that outcomes. So those relationships we know are critical in supporting students, and also as we're preparing educators to say, hey, this is about working with people, and we have to do it in a caring and compassionate way.
Tell me a little bit, how do those students, the young, I guess they're 4 and 5-year-olds, how do they end up being in this program? And then we're going to talk about the fellows themselves, but tell me a little bit about the students.
Yeah, so our work is, more relationships with, say, districts or providers, and then we work with them to identify classrooms, and then from there, our fellows will spend a couple weeks building relationships with students, and then they'll do an assessment. And I say assessment again, it's fun. It doesn't come like, hey, we're testing. Like the students don't feel like it's a test, but it's an assessment. They'll do some reading together, look at some letters, and from there they'll determine what students will get more focused interventions on a daily basis, while also including some others in the class will get some of the interventions, but that caseload will get more focused interventions on a daily basis.
Got it. So let's talk more about the fellows. So you do recruitment. Some of them probably, do they find you somehow also from outreach that you've done? And then tell me a little bit about that process. What happens?
So yeah, it's a mix. So some find us whether it's online postings. Some find us, somebody may have referred them a community organization, a previous fellow, a staff member. It varies. Or some, like I said, when we're out and do presentations, or we're out in the community, or we have something going on, and that's how fellows get connected as well. And so it's a process where we do interview the fellows. We talk with them more about the logistics, hey, about that commitment piece, right? Like having that 8 to 1 available Monday through Friday for that full school year, and why that's important. Just understanding more about some of the logistics on there. So that's a discussion up front. We do an interview with fellows more so to get to know them better. What we say is you're the expert in yourself, and so the interview is not a got you moment, right? It's just a chance for us all to kind of learn more about each other, and that's the crux of the process for us. It's more about, is this for both parties? Say, is this a good fit for a person at this point in time? And sometimes it's not, and we're okay with that because it's also we've had fellows come back at a different point in time because that time was right for them. And so we're open. We also communicate, say, hey, we want to support you, even if you're not a fellow. We're here to, people that want to support you. It's really the approach in saying this is about a community. This is about connection. How do we start that process and showing that from even the beginning of this process?
I think the first program you had was 2022. Is that right? So relatively recently.
Yes, here in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Yes, that was the first
In
year.
Atlanta, right.
Right.
So the fellows start, they sign up, they're committed. They're going to be there Monday through Friday for the school year from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then what kind of training? So a lot of these young men have not had training necessarily in education or teaching, right? So what is it that they get, and how do they find themselves then, in that classroom with that young group of pre-K?
That's actually one of my favorite parts, the training and the amount of training that they get. So before fellows even enter the classroom, they get at least 40 hours of training. And so on staff, we have literacy coaches who come to us with experience and expertise in working with folks around literacy. And they work with those fellows, training them not only like in the curriculum, but how to do it from the aspect of working with preschool and pre-K students. So that happens before they even enter the class, and then we layer it on throughout the year. So we know that education, you can give it all the training you want up front, but once you get in there with students, there's some other learnings that have to happen, and so we give them a good base and good foundation. They start in the classroom, and then we spend time each month with training specifically around that curriculum that's delivered by our literacy coaches. And then in addition to that, some other members of our staff, our program managers, our program associates, they lead trainings on more around professional and personal development. So thinking about things like college and career literacy, financial literacy, mental health and wellness, civic literacy. And so really we want to provide robust menu of training and development and support. And so fellows are well positioned when they step in that classroom. I think it's thinking about again them as human beings and how do we provide a support for them as people so that they in turn can provide that support for those young human beings that they're going to interact with.
Right. And tell me a little bit. I mean, we got to meet some of those amazing young men when we visited the site. Maybe you could describe some of the experience they have throughout the year and how this fellowship actually changes them.
I was thinking about this, and I think it was great that got to see them near the end of that experience, and then we have some fellows right now that are starting the experience. Thinking about where they end up is powerful just to watch. I'll say because the classroom affords a lot of learning. We a lot of times we think about the students, but the classroom affords a lot of learning for the teachers and educators as well. What I actually said to somebody just recently, it has a way of pointing out the things and areas where we could do a little bit more support and work. And it has a way of doing that. And so for fellows, that's going to happen. They're going to be challenged. They're going to face some situations that are difficult. And that's just a part of even that, some of those first year experiences of being in classrooms. And for us, one, we know that and saying that's okay. And then two, providing, a group of people and some other supports that not only continue to tell them that it's okay, but continue to tell them that we believe in them and that we're there to support them. So I think what happens by the end of this is that fellows are able to take a look back and really see some of their own growth. They're able to see some of their resilience. They're able to see where they've been challenged and able to push forward and where they've been pushed. And so, a great example is in that visit that we had that you got to meet some of our fellows. A couple of them volunteered and came up and shared about their experience. And some of them at the beginning of the year absolutely would not have done that. Right. And so it's an environment where I think whether explicit or implicitly, they feel like it's their environment, they have a say in it, and that's what we push and encourage and allow that space for growth. And I just I think that's key, right? Not only for young men of color, but for others, folks as we think about developing professionals, is being in environments where challenge is welcome, where you're pushed to grow, you're encouraged to grow, and you have people that continue and consistently say, "We're here for you," and I think it just makes a world of difference.
So you've had a couple of graduation years, right? You've had a couple of fellowship programs go through the whole year now. What are some of those fellows doing now as they finish? Are they entering the education field? Are they finding that the education environment to be something that seems welcoming to them or inclusive of them?
One, I would say it's interesting to watch during the year. That's another an area of growth. Some that fellows that start out just like, look, I just wanted a job and this worked out. And, and that escalates to in the middle of the year. Yeah, I kind of like this thing, but I don't know about teaching. And then by the end of the year, it's more of them talking about, yes, I'm definitely continuing in the education field.
Love
Um,
that.
yeah, it's for some, each year for us here in Atlanta, over half of a cohort has continued in the education field. For some of those that haven't, there's other opportunities that we're a better fit for them or more aligned with where they wanted to take their careers. A few have done some become full-time college students looking to study education as well as some other areas. We've had a fellow that decided to teach abroad and has taught in Spain. Some fellows that are serving and working as paraprofessionals in schools. What's striking is how they talk about it now as well. So for some, is seeing it more of a as a career, is hearing them talk about the things that they learn and how they implement in the classrooms that they're working in now. And then, just hearing I was somewhere recently, one of our fellows that's working at a school I met, and somebody that works at that school as well. And they're like, "Oh yeah, I was just in this class just the other day," and was saying nothing but great things about them. So that's always good to hear as well.
I used to work in the School of Education for several years, and just being in the field of education, we hear a lot. There are enough men who are in teaching, particularly in the primary grades. And then, of course, we hear, oh, and there aren't enough young men of color or young Black men who want to enter teaching. It's sort of set up by, in some ways, it's like, oh, we have this problem. We don't know how to get them into the pipeline. And it seems that this approach you're taking is sort of turning that on its head in a fabulous way, because you're growing people, you're growing the interest and the awareness to make it be an environment where they want to enter teaching. I mean, is that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of what I'm hearing in terms of the impact that you're having.
No, you're not. That's accurate. And I'll add this in saying, another component that is huge within this is that the fact that fellows are going through this with other young men of color, and so the relationships that they build, mean so much to them. And that's not me saying it. That's what they tell us. I talk about it as a brotherhood, not as a marketing term or a term I came up with, but because of the term of that they've used and how they talk about it. And so that's a hugely important piece for them, being in conversations that honestly, quite frankly, they just haven't really been able to have consistently, even about themselves, even about what they want to do, their hopes, their dreams, being vulnerable in spaces, having some difficult conversations. And so for them to be in a room regularly with other young men of color, working positively to impact lives in their community plays a huge role. And so, we've seen that across not only Atlanta, but in our other regions as well. And a part of it is the work we do up front. We do a week where we're all together and not only training, but doing some other events and things together. So it's all opportunities to help them build that bond that we know is going to be important for them throughout this experience.
It's just an amazing program. What are your ideas about how we infuse something like this into our teacher training programs? And is that even possible given the inherent structure? Just from the fact that a teacher training program, to get in, you need to have certain background or certain test scores, or even have the interest or think it's even something that's possible to do, right?
Right. I think it's something that you said earlier, right? Like identifying a problem. And then the second part I would add is, how committed are we to that piece? And if we are, then we understand that, when there's some things that maybe we wouldn't or shouldn't or don't want to do, but there's some things that we may have to do, right? But what I'm getting at is like recruitment. Yeah, if we want, more men, we have to go out where these young men are, and we have to have conversations in a way that aren't one side. They're listening. We're listening to help understand what challenges there may be. We have to think about barriers, right? For thinking about schools of education. This is I'm just completely making this up, but right, like what is the timeline it takes from when we apply to when we start? Is that a barrier for someone, right? If there some other concerns or think about making money, that's what are some other opportunities that we could think about and further leverage in this. I think an opportunity is we look at some of the districts and how they're partnering with some colleges and universities where work, credit for work will count towards that degree. I think we have to listen more and better understand where barriers and be willing and committed to removing some of those barriers and then providing the environments that it takes to support students and folks in getting in and staying in this field.
Could you talk a little bit more about what some of those barriers are that you find from your listening, your very active listening, especially in recruitment as well as in the actual year that the fellows spend with you? What are some of those barriers, and how are you addressing them, or how are you mitigating them?
I think it's best for me. I mean, these are some real life examples. One thing is that our role is part time. So again, 8 to 1, sometimes 8 to 2. Fellows are paid $17 an hour. One of the things we think about, on the listening piece is that we were hearing couple years ago where we started at $15 that it wasn't going to work. And so we did increase that. Listening and hearing from fellows that it's part, but there's more that they need in terms of income. And so we've started to build partnerships and relationships with some other organizations that have opportunities in the afternoons or evenings so that fellows have some other opportunities to make some money. Transportation is a challenge. Those are just real live examples that we're working through right now and building relationships with other community organizations that will support in addressing those barriers that fellows have not only when they come to us, but even throughout the program that may pop up.
You've talked about how literacy and then the teaching of literacy and how you support the young men in this way, that there's a piece there that's around social justice, right? When we put literacy and education together in this way, that's something that we know we need to be doing a lot more of in these communities that aren't necessarily even believing that education is a way forward. I would love to just hear your thoughts about that.
I think literacy is, just to say it's critical and important doesn't do it in and of itself enough justice. A colleague I used to work with, just somebody wants to be a rocket scientist, like they still have to know how to read, and so literacy is embedded in so much of what we do: math, science, all the different fields and areas. And so, if we're going to encourage students to go into different fields, and we have to be honest with ourselves and really make sure we're providing the fundamentals and basics that are going to support them in those fields. And then when we think about access to knowledge, right, literacy provides so much of an open door to access to knowledge and information. So when we think about not only reading, writing, communicating, literacy is something that provides a lot of opportunities. And so when we think about, what are ways that we can support communities, right? Education and specifically literacy can play a huge role in how we're setting students up and, for their goals and where they want to go.
Do you have some examples of this from the fellows that you've been working with?
Some of what comes to mind, I think that's impressed me. One is for fellows who have spoken about how they've increased their own literacy and what they're reading and the amount that they're reading.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's not from us saying you need to read more, but it's fellows that have, as they've kind of analyzed their own goals and growth and where they want to go. They've seen their own kind of literacy and reading and, writing. Some of them talk about journaling more regularly and just writing things down. And so, like I said, it's not a direct, like, you should do this. It's more of that encouragement to dream, to follow your dreams, to follow your goals, to follow where you want to go, right? But you're going to need a skill set and some things that help you get there. And for them to kind of analyze and have said, yeah, this literacy piece for them that is super important and critical for them. So that's what comes to mind in thinking about that.
You've talked a little bit before about the role of partnerships and community partnerships. And could you talk a little bit more about how you have set forth to actually create those deeper partnerships in community and what that impact has been?
Personal belief and there's infusing this work. I mean, we can't do it by ourselves. And even when we think of, if we can focus on what our mission and vision, we can't do it by ourselves. And so partnership and community is necessary. And my approach is that, one, I think it's easy to sometimes look at other groups and how can we partner with them and say what can we get from them. But my approach, I think, is for us, how do we make sure we're being a good partner first, and that's where it starts, being a good partner. On the other end, thinking about what makes sense in terms of partnerships, right? Is there a need that needs to be filled? More support, like we said, transportation, income. Are there, when we think about our personal and professional development, what's our actual capacity? We talk about financial literacy. I'm not a financial literacy expert, but we were able to get connected to some great folks with Bank of America who said, absolutely, we'll come in and do not only some sessions with fellows about financial literacy, but we'll also host an event at our offices and give fellows a chance to hear from professionals in this field. And then on the back end, we've been able to partner with another group who offers some personal financial coaching. And fellows said after the Bank of America session, said, hey, we need some more. We need some more intense and more support around our individual situations. And so we were able to partner with somebody that provides individualized financial coaching. Was out here listening, understanding what listening to feedback from fellows. So looking at the community, seeing where opportunities are. Some great folks here. We partner with around some training opportunities for fellows. Folks like Profound Gentlemen is an organization, national organization that supports male educators of color. And so it only made sense for us to partner now. Fellows that are come back for a second year and are alum that are in education are part of that organization. And so now they get continued support after they leave us. This work can't be done alone and it can't be done in isolation. And so it's going to require us to be open to it, creative around it, dream around it, make sure we're being good partners in this work.
Yeah, that's great. It really sounds like you're creating sort of you're weaving the fabric together. You're creating a strong web of support for these young men of color to be successful in what they do. And it takes connecting those dots. It takes those partnerships. It takes those relationships. Not to be cliche, it takes a village. We know that, and it seems like you're really putting that into practice. How are you thinking about expanding this program? You have now, what, about 20 fellows a year there in the Atlanta region? This is a program that I can see in so many parts of the country, or even just in the southern region. I'm imagining there's just a phenomenal opportunity there in that way. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so in Metro Atlanta this year, we'll get up to 40 fellows, so doubling right here in the Atlanta area. And then as we think about it more broadly, you're absolutely right. A lot of opportunity. Some folks in the number of cities and places that have said, hey, if you think about expanding, keep us in mind. I think as an organization is just thinking about scalable in a sense of quality. And what I mean is that, we could, yeah, this sounds great. Let's just go here. But also, what are the resources that will be in place? What's that web of support look like? What's our own organizational capacity look like? And so that's part of, as we look at the South, part of that's kind of in my bucket as we look organizationally about expansion here in the South. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm excited to see what's coming.
Thank you very much, Julius, for sharing the inspiring work you and your team are doing. It's clear that you're creating meaningful change, not just in the field of education, but also deep in the hearts and minds within the communities you serve. The Leading Men Fellowship is showing what's possible when young men of color are encouraged and supported to step into classrooms as educators and role models. And what a powerful support system you've created, providing these fellows with professional development, building their own resilience, and equipping them with the skills they need to thrive both in and outside the classroom. You're doing such amazing work, and I would love to continue this conversation in the future. Perhaps in a future episode, we could hear firsthand from some of the fellows themselves and learn about the impact this program is having on them and the impact they're making in the classroom. So thank you again, Julius, for your time, dedication, and your commitment.
Absolutely. My honor and pleasure. We appreciate you, Lisa. And yeah, absolutely. If we can get fellows on, whether that's season 2, 3, 4, or 5, we'll be ready.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the show this week. This has been Lisa Petrides with Educating to be Human. If you enjoy our show, please rate and review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can access our show notes for links and information on our guests. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at edu2behuman. That is EDU to be human. This podcast was created by Lisa Petrides and produced by Eleni Theros. Educating to be Human is recorded by Nathan Sherman and edited by Ty Mayer.